Hello, everyone. I'm Casey. Today, I want to share the story of Doris. She is a woman who spent her entire life working hard and making sacrifices to build a future for her son, only to find that in a world of black credit cards and luxury estates, her simple sincerity was treated like an old, useless relic. Come with me to Doris's. The kitchen in my small Ohio home was so quiet this afternoon, but the ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a heavy hammer striking my chest. I had just set down my wrench after fixing a leaky faucet, and my hand still carried that familiar scent of rust and old metal, a smell that usually brought me comfort, but today it just felt heavy. I'm a woman who spent my entire life working alongside my husband, our hands stained with grease as we built a future for our son, David. When the phone on the table finally buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. It was David. He hadn't called me in 2 weeks, and for a moment, a flicker of joy pushed through the deep loneliness that has become my constant companion since I became a widow. "Mom, Vanessa wants you to come to Mrs. Serenity's birthday party this Saturday night." David's voice crackled through the line, but it lacked the warmth of a son who actually missed his mother. There was a hesitation in his tone, and I could hear a long sigh on the other end. I knew Vanessa was likely standing right there, monitoring every word he said and making sure he didn't sound too affectionate. "Remember to wear something business casual, and please, you know how much the Thompsons value high standards," he added. Those words felt like a sharp needle piercing my self-esteem. He didn't ask how I was doing or if I needed a ride. He just laid out these unspoken rules so I wouldn't embarrass his wife in front of her wealthy friends. I murmured a quick agreement and hung up, the silence of the house rushing back in to swallow me. I looked around the living room at the old photographs of my husband and me. We used to be the best mechanics in the county, people who knew how to fix things. Now, our hard-earned certificates and the simple life we built are treated like cheap, embarrassing relics in the eyes of my in-laws. I turned down the only family photo I had with David and Vanessa, feeling the weight of being pushed to the margins of my own son's life. With inflation skyrocketing lately and prices for everything going up, I have to calculate every penny of my fixed income just to get by. Yet I still wanted to find something truly special for them. I took a deep breath, trying to swallow the lump in my throat as I sat there rocking slowly back and forth. "It is my choice," I whispered to the empty room. "I have to go for David, even though I know the price of being there will be the kind of hurt I have become far too familiar with." I reach into the drawer and pull out a silver picture frame I just bought for $68 at Target. It is a price that made me hesitate for an entire week as I stood in the aisle, because every dollar of my small retirement pension is usually reserved for my medications and the rising costs of living in this current economy. But I wanted something that looked sophisticated enough to cross the threshold of the Thompson estate without being immediately looked down upon. As the bright silver reflects my tired eyes, a cold, sharp memory from 5 years ago crashes into my mind, making my hands tremble as the past and present collide. 5 years ago, just after my husband's funeral, David brought Vanessa home to meet me for the first time. Back then, I still owned our small family mechanic shop, which had been my husband's pride and joy for over 40 years. Vanessa stood there, in her expensive designer dress, looking at our wrenches and grease-stained floors as if they were nothing but piles of filthy scrap metal. I remember that afternoon so clearly when she whispered to David, making sure I could hear every cutting word. She asked him if he really intended to let his mother continue in such a low-class profession, because it would ruin their reputation in places like Worthington Hills. Instead of defending his father's legacy or my hard work, David just bowed his head and eventually pressured me into selling the shop, under the guise of wanting me to rest. They used a portion of that money to invest in their luxury condo, and slowly, I became a stain they needed to hide away from their new social circle. The breaking point came when I visited them on their first anniversary, carrying a pot of the homemade beef stew David always loved. Vanessa wouldn't even let me step onto her plush velvet rug. She looked at me with such coldness and said that my smell of grease and cheap food would ruin her $1,000 sofa, and she begged me not to embarrass her in front of her friends anymore. That was the moment I realized my unconditional love was seen as nothing but a burden to their vanity. I turned away into a torrential Ohio rain, feeling a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound could ever reach. Now, I take a deep breath to push down the lump of resentment in my throat. I look at this silver frame and wonder if it is enough to cover the scent of hard work that Vanessa has always loathed. The anger from these last 5 years hasn't faded. It has just hardened into a protective shell around my heart. I know I am right to keep my distance and to stop seeking their approval. But looking at the empty space beside me in this quiet house, I know the wound is still there, bleeding in the silence. I will go to this party, not to beg for their love, but to fulfill my final duty as a mother before I close the door to my heart for good. I smoothed the creases of my crisp shirt as I stood before the mirror, trying to fix a stubborn lock of silver hair that seemed to have a mind of its own. The silver picture frame I bought sat wrapped carefully in silk paper on the shelf, like a cold, heavy reminder of the trip I was about to take into a world where I no longer felt I belonged. Looking at my reflection, I did not see the strong, confident mechanic who could strip an engine in an afternoon. Instead, I saw a woman carrying a heavy stone of resentment that I have dragged behind me for 5 long years. A weight that has bowed my shoulders more than age ever could. Just last Sunday, at a neighborhood barbecue, my neighbor, Mrs. Miller, asked how David was doing and why she hadn't seen his fancy car in my driveway for so long. I gave her the smile I have practiced 1,000 times in the privacy of my hallway, and told her he was simply exhausted from his high-stakes work at the law firm in Columbus. The lie came out so naturally, it was frightening to me. A polished mask used to hide the painful truth that my son hasn't given me a real phone call in over a month. I saved his reputation in front of the neighbors, but my heart felt like it was wrying blood, because the price of this silence and the cost of keeping up appearances is becoming far too expensive for my soul to afford. Tonight, I stood on my porch, watching the Millers across the street through the soft golden light of their windows. The sound of children laughing and the sight of 3 generations sitting around a table filled with roasted chicken and warm cornbread made me have to turn my head away. Inside my own home, the wooden table is set for only one. The potato soup I made has been reheated for 3 days straight, because cooking for myself feels like an admission of my own solitude. My anger at Vanessa and my deep disappointment in David have built a safe fortress around me. But I am beginning to realize it has also turned my life into a desert where no one can reach me. Every night I drink a cup of hot herbal tea to soothe the chronic headache that comes from spending hours convincing myself that I am perfectly fine on my own. I reached out to turn off the desk lamp, letting the room fall into the deep, quiet shadows of suburban Ohio. The wrinkles on my forehead seemed to grow deeper after every silent Thanksgiving and every holiday spent staring at the phone. I wonder if I hadn't been so stubborn, or if I had just bent a little to Vanessa's shallow standards. Would I be holding my grandchild in my arms right now? But then my pride rises up again, cold and sharp as a winter frost, silencing any soft thoughts of reconciliation. I am not ready to forgive. But as I sit here in the dark, I can feel that this anger isn't just punishing them. It is slowly eroding the very life I have left. Has a hurt ever kept you from the people you love? We protect our pride, but lose priceless years. Did you, like Doris, ever tell a lie to protect your children? Your experiences are sacred. Please share in the comments. Casey is here to listen and honor your truth. Saturday morning in Ohio arrived, with the sky so blue and clear, it almost felt like a taunt, considering the heavy knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I stood in my driveway, carefully placing the silver-wrapped gift on the passenger seat of my 2014 Toyota Camry, a car that has seen better days, but still gets me where I need to go. As I turned the key, the engine gave a low, rhythmic grumble, a familiar sound that felt like a complaint about its own aging parts, much like the aches I feel in my joints on damp mornings. I had spent over an hour getting ready, choosing my very best outfit, a pair of dark navy slacks and a cream-colored silk blouse that I usually keep for special occasions. My silver hair was pinned back neatly, every strand in place, as I made a silent, desperate promise to myself. I would be on time. I would stay perfectly clean. I would give Vanessa absolutely no reason to look at me with that subtle, pained expression of hers. I wanted, just for one evening, to fit into the polished, high society world of Worthington Hills, without feeling like a smudge on a window pane. I was cruising along the I-71 interstate, watching the miles tick away, only about 15 minutes from the gated entrance of the Thompson estate. The traffic was rushing past, a blur of shiny, newer models and busy families, when my eyes caught a flash of silver on the shoulder. It was a brand-new Mercedes S-Class, parked at an awkward angle, with its hazard lights blinking a weak, rhythmic SOS. Standing beside it was a woman who looked to be about my age, dressed in an elegant suit that probably cost more than my car, looking down at a hood that was venting a thin, worrisome wisp of white smoke. In that split second, Vanessa's voice hissed through my mind, a sharp reminder that I needed to be on time and that I shouldn't make a scene. I checked the clock on my dashboard. Stopping would definitely make me late, and if I even touched that engine, my silk blouse would be ruined. But the hands of an old mechanic have a memory and a will of their own, and I simply could not leave a woman alone on the side of a scorching highway when I knew exactly what that sound in her engine meant. I whispered a quiet apology to David, telling the air that I just couldn't turn a blind eye, and I steered my Camry onto the gravelly shoulder. The woman looked up as I approached, her face a mask of surprise and genuine distress. She told me her car had just died, and the roadside assistance service had warned her it would be at least an hour before a tow truck could reach her. I gave her the most reassuring smile I could muster, pulling off my thin lace gloves and beginning to roll up my silk sleeves. I told her not to worry, that I had spent half my life listening to the language of engines instead of listening to the radio. As I leaned over the warm metal, the scent of hot oil and engine coolant rose up to meet me, and strangely, I felt more awake and capable than I had in years. It was a simple issue with the alternator belt, something that could be coaxed back into place if you knew the right angle and had the right touch. But without that knowledge, she was stranded. I reached deep into the cramped, greasy spaces of the engine, feeling the grit of road dust on my skin and the sharp edge of a metal frame against my silk-covered elbow. I felt a warm, dark smudge of oil bloom across my cheek, and I knew in that moment that my expensive blouse was a lost cause. But I didn't care about Vanessa or the party anymore. My only focus was getting this woman back on the road safely. After 20 minutes of focused work, I signaled for her to try the ignition, and the engine roared back to life with a powerful, healthy growl. She was so thrilled she almost hugged me, but when she saw the state of my clothes, she stopped, her eyes filling with a deep, concerned sympathy. "Oh, dear, I have completely ruined your beautiful outfit," she exclaimed, frantically pulling out tissues to try and wipe the dark grease from my hands. I looked down at myself and saw the damage. My cream blouse was now streaked with thick black oil. My fingernails were stained with heavy grease, and I could only imagine what my face looked like. I just laughed it off, telling her that clothes can always be washed, but a heart that feels heavy from leaving someone in trouble is much harder to clean. She looked at me then, with a kind of genuine respect and gratitude that I haven't seen in my own children's eyes for a very long time. She asked for my name, and I only had time to tell her it was Doris before I hurried back to my car, knowing I was already behind schedule. When I finally drove through the stone pillars of Worthington Hills, my dusty old Camry looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a dog show. Rows of gleaming Porsches and Teslas lined the driveway, reflecting the late afternoon sun like jewels. I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, and I nearly burst into tears right then and there. My hair was coming loose. There was a smear of grease across my jaw, and my favorite silk shirt was a disaster. I sat there for a long moment, my hands trembling as I gripped the silver gift box. I knew exactly what was waiting for me behind those massive front doors. The hushed whispers, the judgmental looks from Vanessa, and the cold realization that I had once again failed to meet their standards. But as I rubbed a smudge of oil on my thumb, a strange, quiet confidence began to settle over me. I realized I wasn't arriving as a lonely widow looking for a scrap of approval. I was arriving as a person who had just done something useful and kind. I stepped out of the car, straightened my back, and pressed the doorbell of the Thompson mansion, ready to face whatever came next with my head held high. I stood before the tall oak doors of the Thompson estate, clutching the silver-wrapped gift box in my oil-stained hands. The doorbell echoed through the house with a deep, expensive chime that made the buzzing bell in my small apartment feel like a toy. I took a deep breath, trying to use the hem of my shirt to cover the largest grease stain on my chest, but I knew deep down I was trying to hide a fire with a tiny scrap of cloth. My heart hammered against my ribs, not because of the grandeur of the house, but because of that familiar, cold fear of failing to meet Vanessa's impossible standards. The door swung open, and there stood Serenity Thompson, in a navy silk dress and a strand of pearls that caught a light like tiny moons. Her polite social smile vanished the second her eyes landed on my mud-covered shoes and the dark oil streaks across my cream blouse.
She didn't even say hello. Instead, she took a physical step back, as if I were a contagious disease that had suddenly appeared on her doorstep. When I held out the gift, she reached out with just 2 fingers to pinch the edge of the ribbon, as if she was afraid my poverty might somehow rub off on her perfectly manicured hands. "Mrs. Doris, you are late, and it seems you have had quite an eventful trip," she said, her voice sounding as cold as the marble floors in the silent foyer. Hearing the commotion, Vanessa stepped out from the living room, holding a glass of champagne. Her face went pale and then flushed a deep, angry red.
She didn't ask if I was okay or why I looked like this. Instead, she hissed through her teeth, loud enough for me to feel the sting, but quiet enough so her wealthy friends wouldn't hear. "What on earth have you done to yourself? I told you to dress properly," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if my presence were a permanent stain on her white carpet. David stood behind her, looking at me with a pained expression, before quickly looking down at the floor, turning his wedding ring around his finger like a man too ashamed to speak up. I tried to explain that I had stopped to help a woman on the highway, but Vanessa cut me off with a sharp, disgusted wave of her hand. "I don't want to hear it. Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster," she said. She turned to David with a commanding tone and told him to take me to the back kitchen, at least until I could scrub that filth off. A wave of humiliation rose in my throat, and I realized I wasn't a mother-in-law today. I was just an outdated relic being shoved into a dark corner to keep the party perfect. I looked at David, hoping for one word of defense, but he just touched my arm and whispered for me to just go along with it. My feet felt heavy as I walked toward the kitchen, leaving behind the sounds of laughter and the scent of expensive perfume, which were quickly being replaced by the bitter smell of betrayal. The Thompson kitchen was vast and modern, to the point of being bone-chillingly cold. Everything in it was white marble and polished stainless steel, surfaces so clean they looked like they had never been touched by a human hand, much less a drop of engine oil. I stood there alone by the sink, watching the warm water run over my hands, trying to wash away the black streaks that had settled into the lines of my palms. The soft sounds of jazz music floated in from the living room, mixed with the light, tinkling laughter of people I was supposed to call my family. But here, surrounded by the sterile scent of lavender air freshener and an almost surgical level of cleanliness, I felt like an indelible stain that no amount of scrubbing could ever remove. I used a paper towel to dry my hands, trying to smooth out my ruined silk blouse as best I could. The oil stain had faded a little, but it still left a dark, jagged shadow right over my left breast, exactly where my heart was tightening in my chest. I didn't want to sit here like a punished child, waiting for permission to leave. I wanted to find David, to tell him that I needed to go home, back to my quiet house where I didn't feel like an intruder. I pushed the heavy kitchen door open just a crack, intending to slip through the side hallway to find my son. But then, the sound of voices from the small library nearby made my feet stop dead in their tracks. It was Vanessa's voice, sharp as a razor and trembling with a cold, controlled fury, joined by the deep, authoritative rumble of Mr. Palmer. "I told you, Dad, this is an absolute disaster," Vanessa's voice hissed. "Today is the most important day for our family. Mrs. Whitfield could arrive at any minute, and his mother shows up looking like a homeless person who just crawled out from under a truck. I have spent months building a perfect image for this family, just so we could sign this contract. And then she does this. Mister," sounding as dry as dead leaves skittering across a sidewalk. "Calm down, Vanessa. I already told David to keep her in the kitchen. We will just tell the guests she is an emergency repair person who had to come in at the last minute. No one needs to know she is David's mother. A woman like that simply does not belong here. She is a reminder of the very past we are trying to scrub away from your husband." I held my breath, my back pressed hard against the cold, unyielding wall. Every word they spoke felt like a hammer blow to my head, shattering the last of my illusions. They weren't just embarrassed by my clothes. They were embarrassed by my very existence. In their eyes, I wasn't a person or a mother. I was an error in the perfect business plan of the Thompson family. They looked at my life of honest labor and saw only something to be ashamed of, a social disease they needed to quarantine in the back of the house. But David insisted on inviting her. Serenity's voice chimed in, dripping with a thick layer of mockery. He said she was lonely. Lonely? With that mechanic's pension of hers, she should be grateful we even gave her son a place in this social circle. Vanessa, you really need to teach your husband some perspective. Family sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford if we want to maintain our standing here in Worthington Hills. If Lauren Whitfield sees her, she will think we come from low origins. And people like Lauren only invest in the absolute best, the most refined. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of pure disgust wash over me. It wasn't disgust for myself or my dirty hands, but for the hollow emptiness hidden behind their expensive suits and their strands of pearls. They worshipped money so completely that they were willing to turn their own family member into a nameless repair person just to save face. They feared poverty and honest work as if it were a plague that could ruin their lives in an instant. They were living in $1 million mansion, but their souls were so poor they couldn't even afford a single scrap of compassion or respect for the woman who raised the man they relied on. David, say something. Vanessa's voice rang out, and my heart squeezed tight when I realized my son had been standing there the whole time, listening to them tear me apart. I waited, holding my breath for a single word of defense, for a sentence that would tell them they were wrong about his mother. There was a silence that stretched out until it felt like I was suffocating. Finally, David's voice rose, but it was weak and filled with a cowardly desperation. You are right, Vanessa. She shouldn't have stopped to fix that damn car. She is always like this, trying to be a hero in places where no one asked her to be. I will tell her to stay in the kitchen, or I will just take her home early, before Mrs. Whitfield gets here. I am sorry. I didn't think she would ruin everything like this. And that was it. The final wall inside me crumbled into dust. It wasn't the cruelty of the Thompsons that broke me. It was the spinelessness of my own son. My boy, the child who used to hold my hand and promised to buy me a big house one day, was now apologizing for his mother's kindness. He saw my act of saving a stranded stranger as ruining everything. He was so afraid of losing his seat at their table that he was willing to shove his own mother into the shadows and call her a mistake. I didn't cry. Strangely, the sharp pain I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked down at my hands again, seeing the oil that still lingered under my fingernails. These hands had worked until they bled, so that David could have the suit he was wearing, so he could have that confident voice he used in front of his father-in-law. I realized right then that I could never forgive or reconcile with these people by trying to be more like them. The distance between us wasn't about bank accounts or zip codes. It was about character.
They lived in a palace of lies, and I realized I didn't want a single room in it. I turned slowly and walked back toward the kitchen, with footsteps so light they didn't make a sound on the expensive tile. I wouldn't go looking for David anymore. I wouldn't offer an explanation or an apology for my appearance. I wouldn't beg for a single crumb of acceptance from anyone in that house. I would find the back exit, the one meant for the help, and I would walk out to where my old Toyota was waiting. I belonged on the open highways, among the people who actually needed help, not in this gilded tomb full of beautiful, empty people. I had seen their other side, the truth behind the pearls and the champagne, and that truth, as bitter as it was, had finally set me free.
I stepped out of the kitchen through the back service door, my old feet feeling as though they were treading on jagged shards of broken glass. The sounds of laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses from the living room faded into a dull hum. But David's voice, that hollow voice of rejection, kept boring into my ears like a rusted drill bit. I walked across the perfectly manicured green lawn of the Worthington Hills estate, where even the blades of grass seemed to be mocking my grease-stained appearance. My old Toyota Camry sat waiting under the streetlights, looking battered and out of place among the luxury cars. But it was the only thing in this world that still belonged to me without judgment. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the doors shut, letting the silence wrap around me like a cold, heavy blanket. I looked in the rearview mirror at a woman with a face smudged by engine oil and eyes that were red but surprisingly empty of tears. My hands, the same hands that changed David's diapers, held him while he took his first steps and fixed 1,000 engines to save for his college tuition, were trembling violently on the steering wheel. A hot, bitter anger flared up inside me. I wanted to get out of the car, storm back into that glittering room, and throw that $68 silver frame I bought at Target right at Vanessa's feet. I wanted to scream so every high society guest could hear that this dirty woman was the one who built the polished gentleman they were all praising. But then a memory of David at 10 years old flickered in my mind. He used to sit on a wooden stool in his father's shop, his tiny hands covered in grease, grinning as he told me he was going to be the best mechanic in the world, just to help his mom. Back then, the oil was a mark of pride, a bond between us. Now, those same hands were shaking because of a look from a woman who measured worth in bank balances. I realized that the little boy I knew had died a long time ago, buried under expensive suits and empty tea parties. The weight of that truth left me exhausted. My anger turned into a vast, deep sadness, a black hole in the center of my chest. I hadn't just lost a party invitation. I had lost my only son to a world I would never understand. I reached out to turn the key in the ignition, but my hand stopped. If I left now, I would take all this hatred home with me, and it would gnaw at me in my quiet house every single night. But if I went back to confront them, I would just be playing their dirty game of social status. "Doris, you are a mechanic," I whispered to myself in the dark. A mechanic knows when an engine is beyond repair and simply needs to be replaced. This family, this relationship, it was broken at the very core. The forgiveness I once hoped for, the idea of shrinking myself just to be accepted, felt ridiculous now. True forgiveness wasn't about them loving me. It was about me letting myself out of this gilded cage of contempt. I looked down at the grease stain on my shirt. It wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a medal of the kindness I gave to that woman on the highway. It was proof of a life spent in honest labor. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh Ohio night air fill my lungs. I was done being their emergency repair person. I was done being their dirty secret. I turned the key, and the engine of my Toyota roared to life, a rough but honest sound in a place that reeked of fake perfume. I was leaving, not because I was running away, but because I had finally found the most precious thing I almost lost. I found myself. Ever felt the deepest hurt comes from those we love most? Choosing between a painful bond and your self-respect is a heavy burden. Was Doris too harsh to leave without a goodbye? We value your life's wisdom. Share your thoughts below. Casey is here to listen and honor your truth. I rested my hand on the gear shift of my old Toyota Camry ready to back out of the pristine white gravel driveway of the Thompson estate. My vision was a bit blurry, not necessarily from tears, but from an overwhelming fatigue that felt like it had settled deep into my marrow after witnessing the true faces of the people I called my family. Just as I was about to shift into reverse, a sleek, jet-black Cadillac glided into the driveway, its polished surface reflecting the evening lights like a dark mirror, blocking my path entirely. The driver's side door opened, and a pair of elegant, high-heeled shoes stepped out onto the gravel. I squinted through my dusty windshield, my heart skipping a beat as I recognized the woman standing there. It was the same woman I had helped on the highway. She stood there in the middle of the extravagant Worthington Hills lights, looking so powerful and refined that for a second, I almost didn't recognize the panicked person I had seen stranded by a smoking engine. As her eyes landed on my battered Toyota, she paused, her gaze sliding over my license plate before stopping on my face through the glass. She didn't hesitate for a single second. She walked straight toward my car and gave the window a gentle, rhythmic knock. I lowered the glass, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and lingering bitterness. "Doris? Is that really you?" she asked, her voice carrying a warmth and genuine surprise that felt like a sudden burst of sunlight on a cold day. I opened the door and stepped out, feeling more out of place than ever standing next to her. My clothes were a mess of oil and grease, making the contrast between us sharper than a razor. "Yes, it is me, Mrs. Whitfield," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. I told her I was glad she made it safely and that I was just about to head home, but Lauren didn't let me go. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers closing firmly around my own, and she didn't flinch at the dark engine oil still staining my skin. She held my hand as if we were old friends who had known each other for decades. "I have been worried about you the whole way here," she said, her eyes searching mine with a deep, sincere concern that was a world away from the disgust I had seen in Vanessa's eyes. She asked why I was here and what had happened to make me look so defeated. I took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought about telling one of those polite lies I usually say for my neighbors in Ohio. But looking into Lauren's wise, weary eyes, the lie just died in my throat. "My son is David," I whispered. "He is married to Vanessa Thompson, and I came for a birthday party." I stopped, a small, crooked smile pulling at my lips as I told her I clearly didn't fit the high standards required for an evening like this. Lauren stayed silent for a long time, looking back at the glowing mansion where the jazz music was still playing, sounding hollow and indifferent. "Doris, I am a widow too," she said softly. "My husband passed away 10 years ago, and I had to learn how to steer his company through a world full of people who only value what they can see on the surface." Lauren pulled me a little closer, her voice dropping to a low, powerful whisper that felt like it was stitching my broken pride back together. She told me that when she saw me on the side of the road, she didn't see a dirty mechanic. She saw a noble soul that money could never hope to buy. "Those people inside," she said, gesturing toward the house, "they might own the most expensive crystal glasses in the state, but their souls have likely never been washed by a single drop of real compassion." She told me never to let their lack of character make me doubt my own worth, reminding me that I was the one who saved her from being alone on that highway, and that was what made me truly great. I stared at her in shock as the pieces finally clicked into place. This was the legendary golden investor the Thompsons had been groveling for, the billionaire they treated like a god of wealth. And here she was, holding the greasy hands of a working-class mechanic, and talking about the weight of a person's character. "Doris, I came here tonight to discuss investing in Mr. Palmer's firm," Lauren said, with a knowing, subtle smile. "But I have one rule I never break. I never put my money where human kindness is treated like something cheap and disposable." She asked if I wanted to go back inside with her, not as David's mother, but as the guest of honor and the friend of Lauren Whitfield. I looked down at my hands and then back at the steady, unwavering fire in Lauren's eyes. A wave of warmth spread through me, finally chasing away the cold betrayal that had been suffocating me. I didn't feel like running away anymore. Lauren's presence was like a shield, making me realize that my dignity didn't depend on whether Vanessa allowed me a seat at her table or not. I straightened my back, tucked a loose lock of silver hair behind my ear, and took a deep breath of the night air. "Thank you, Lauren," I said, my voice finally finding its old strength. "I think I will go back in, if only to take back the gift I brought. It might not be worth $1 million, but it contains a sincerity that they simply don't deserve to keep." We walked toward those massive front doors together, side by side. And for the first time that night, I wasn't walking in the shadows of shame. I was walking in the light of my own skin. The doors of the Thompson estate loomed before me again, but this time, the warmth from Lauren's hand prevented the chill of rejection from sinking into my bones. Before stepping over that threshold to face the people who had just humiliated me, I found myself touching the worn wedding ring on my finger. A wave of memory flooded back, as sweet and thick as the smell of morning coffee in our old kitchen in suburban Ohio, carrying me back to Bill, the man who taught me what a person is truly worth. I remembered Bill so clearly then, thinking of those harsh Ohio winters when we would both be lying on our backs under a rusted chassis, our breath mingling in the bone-chilling air as we raced to fix a neighbor's truck before their morning delivery. Bill would often laugh, his teeth white against a face smeared with engine oil, and tell me that our hands might be black from the machines, but our hearts were always clean. He told me never to be ashamed of the stains that made life possible for others. Bill worshipped the hands of labor. He used those greasy hands to lift David for the first time when he was born, and used the money that smelled of motor oil to buy David's first bicycle. To us, that scent wasn't filth. It was the smell of devotion, the scent of a happy family built on nuts, bolts, and patience. Looking back at the $1 million Thompson mansion now, I felt a sudden surge of pity for them. They lived in a world of luxury, but had lost the ability to see the beauty in sincerity. My David had forgotten those afternoons sitting in the shop watching his father work. He had forgotten that the very low standards his wife looked down upon were the foundation that put him in the position he holds today. Bill always told me to keep my head high, because we never took a penny from anyone without sweating for it. The anger I felt earlier simply evaporated, replaced by a strange and beautiful peace. I didn't need to prove anything to David or Vanessa anymore. I just needed to live up to what Bill and I had built together. "Are you ready, Doris?" Lauren's voice was a soft anchor in my ear. I looked down at the oil stain on my blouse, and now it looked as bright and proud as a Medal of Honor. I was no longer a poor, widowed old woman being chased into a kitchen by her daughter-in-law. I was Bill's wife. I was a damn good mechanic, and I was a free woman. I squeezed Lauren's hand, taking a deep breath that felt like it carried the soul of our old shop and the unconditional love Bill had for me. "I am ready, Lauren," I said. "Let's go inside and show them what the real standard of a human being looks like." I stepped forward, steady and proud, knowing Bill was smiling as he watched over every step I took. I stood before the tall oak doors once again, with Lauren's hand resting firmly on my elbow, like a steady anchor in a storm. Just a few minutes ago, I had been ready to drive away in a whirlwind of humiliation, carrying the bitter seeds of hatred back to my lonely house. But as I looked at our twin reflections in the dark glass of the door, one a billionaire and one a mechanic, a simple truth finally settled in my spirit. I realized that if I left this place with a heart full of rage, I would still be a prisoner of the Thompsons. To truly walk away and be free, I had to leave the heavy weight of their judgment and my own resentment right here on their doorstep. Lauren pushed the doors open, and we stepped inside. Immediately, the warm air, thick with the scent of expensive wine and the low hum of practiced laughter surrounded us. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Palmer, Mrs. Serenity, and Vanessa were standing in the center of a circle of wealthy guests, their faces glowing with a desperate, eager sort of flattery as they waited for their golden investor to appear. But then, their smiles froze and twisted into something pathetic and mangled the moment they saw the grease-stained woman standing right next to Lauren Whitfield. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are finally here. We have been so eager to see you," Mr. Palmer began, as he stepped forward with his hand extended. But then, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes bulging as if he were looking at a ghost. Vanessa stood beside him, her face turning a ghostly white, and the wine glass in her hand trembled so violently that a few drops of dark red liquid splashed onto her pristine white carpet. A heavy, judgmental silence filled the room, and for the first time, it was they who were being led to the chopping block of public shame. In that moment, I saw David. He was hiding behind his wife's shoulder, his eyes filled with shock and that same lingering cowardice I had seen earlier. I looked at my son, and then at the fake lines of concern on Vanessa's face, and a strange sense of clarity washed over me. My anger began to evaporate like mist in the morning sun, replaced by a deep compassion, not for them, but for myself. I asked myself, if I really wanted to spend the final years of my life cursing these poor, hollow souls, the answer was no. Forgiveness didn't mean I agreed with their cruelty. It meant I was handing back the trash they had thrown at me. I decided I would not let their toxicity poison another second of my life. I was forgiving them so that I could be free, so that these mechanics' hands could hold the flowers in my garden with peace, instead of being clenched in a fist of fury. Lauren spoke up, her voice ringing out clearly in the absolute stillness of the room. She greeted the Thompsons and noted that she surely didn't need to reintroduce her dear friend Doris. She told the entire room how I had saved her on the highway when everyone else had just driven past. Vanessa tried to force a smile, her voice sounding thin and high, as she stammered about thinking I had already gone home because they were just worried I was tired. I looked directly into my daughter-in-law's eyes, and I felt no spark of hate, just a terrifyingly calm indifference. I told her she didn't need to explain, because I finally understood all of her standards perfectly. Then I turned to David, looking at him one last time, as the mother who had spent her life protecting him. I told him I forgave him for not being able to protect me, and I forgave myself for thinking that money could ever make him happy. An immense feeling of relief spread from my chest through my entire body. The chains of hurt I had been carrying for 5 long years simply vanished into the air. I realized I no longer needed anything from this mansion or the people in it. I looked at Lauren and smiled. A real, genuine smile, for the first time all evening. I didn't need a fight, and I didn't need revenge. The fact that I was standing there with a clean soul, despite the grease on my shirt, was the strongest answer I could ever give. I had decided to walk my own path, leaving behind the people who were still desperately chasing the ghosts of fame and fortune. Is forgiveness a gift we give ourselves? Doris found a rare strength by letting go of resentment toward her family. Have you felt the peace that comes with finally breathing again? Was she right to let it go? Or did they need a harsher lesson? Share your wisdom below. Casey is here to listen and honor your truth. I still stood there, right in the middle of the sprawling and opulent living room of the Worthington Hills estate, where only a few minutes ago I had felt like a pathetic intruder. Lauren's hand remained steady on my shoulder, serving as a silent confirmation of my worth that required no expensive jewelry or designer labels to prove. The crystal chandeliers above cast a brilliant light that reflected off the wine glasses and the rapidly changing faces of my sons-in-laws. I took a deep breath, feeling the scent of the raw truth finally beginning to replace the suffocating smell of expensive perfume and hollow status. This was not a battle to determine a winner or a loser, but a meeting to finally define the true values of a life well lived. Palmer Thompson stepped forward, and the face that was usually tight with arrogance now seemed to sag with a desperate anxiety. Mrs. Whitfield, we are so incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding, he stammered out. We had no idea that you and Mrs. Doris here were such old friends. He emphasized the word friend with a forced clumsiness that was almost painful to witness. Vanessa was quick to follow him, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal looking for a verbal escape route. That's right, Mom, she said, her voice oily and smooth. I was just so worried about your health after such a long drive that I thought you needed to rest in the kitchen, away from the noise. You know how much I care about you. The lies poured out of her so easily, but they only made the atmosphere feel more repulsive in the heavy silence of the room. Lauren did not offer them a smile. She looked directly at Palmer with the cold and calculated gaze of a seasoned executive who had seen every trick in the book. Mr. Palmer, she began, her voice echoing through the silent hall. In business, I choose my partners based on their balance sheets. But in life, I choose my friends based on the balance sheet of their humanity. Mrs. Doris here did not hesitate to ruin her best clothes or sacrifice her precious time to save me from being stranded and alone on a highway. Meanwhile, your family viewed those very marks of hard work and kindness as a source of shame. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink into the minds of everyone listening. I have to wonder, she continued, if I had been that mechanic today, would you have even let me through your front door? Or would you have told me to sit in the kitchen to keep your party looking perfect? David stepped forward then, and his shoulders were slumped like he was carrying the weight of the entire house. He no longer looked like the polished and successful lawyer he pretended to be. I am so sorry, Mom, he whispered, and his voice was trembling with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. For the first time all evening, he actually looked me in the eyes instead of staring down at his expensive leather shoes. I was too weak, he said. I let my own vanity become more important than you. I looked at my son, and the sharp pain I had felt earlier softened into a deep and weary sadness. I held out my oil-stained hands, not to accuse him, but so he could see exactly what he had tried to hide. "David, I don't need an apology to feel better," I said quietly. "I just need you to understand that these grease stains are what raised you and gave you everything you have. If you are ashamed of them, then you are truly ashamed of your own existence." Vanessa tried to speak again, to offer another polished explanation, but I held up my hand to stop her. I looked around the room at the guests, who were now whispering among themselves. "I came here tonight because I love my son, and I wanted to respect his new family," I said. "But I realize now that we live in two completely different worlds. My world measures worth by kindness, while yours is measured by whatever can be bought with a credit card." I turned to Palmer, and my voice was calm, but as hard as steel. "You can keep this luxury, Mr. Palmer. I am taking my stains back home. But believe me, when I tell you that the oil on my shirt can be washed out, but the stain on the way you treat other human beings is something no soap in the world can ever remove." Lauren gave me a proud and knowing smile. Then she turned back to Palmer and told him that their deal was off because she refused to invest in a place where character had no value. She turned to me and reached out her hand. "Let's go, Doris," she said. "I know a little place on the edge of town that serves the best ribs in Ohio, and the best part is, they don't care if we have a little grease on our hands." I took her hand and walked out of that mansion with my head held high, ignoring the shocked stares of the Thompson family. As I stepped through those doors, I felt a sense of absolute freedom. I hadn't changed them, but I had saved myself. The greatest reconciliation of the night wasn't with Vanessa or Palmer. It was the reconciliation between me and my own self-respect. The sound of my old Toyota's tires humming steadily along the I-71 interstate felt like a song of liberation. Worthington Hills was finally fading into the rear-view mirror, disappearing into the deep Ohio night, along with those brilliant but freezing crystal chandeliers. I reached over and rolled down the window, just enough to let the cool night air rush in, blowing away the heavy scent of expensive perfume that seemed to have clung to my hair and skin like a layer of dust. Lauren was driving her Cadillac right behind me, her headlights acting like a silent night guard, leading me back to a reality that actually felt warm and real. I had never felt my heart quite this light, as if I had just stepped out of a suit of rusted iron armor that I had been forcing myself to wear for years just to make other people comfortable. We pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Moon Diner, a classic roadside spot with flickering neon signs in shades of electric blue and pink, and red leather booths that had been softened by decades of use. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee hit me the moment we stepped inside, wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. This was exactly where I belonged. Lauren, a woman who could buy and sell everyone in that mansion we just left, sat down on the old vinyl seat as naturally as if she had been coming here her whole life. She set her expensive designer bag on the scratched Formica table without a second thought. She looked at me and asked if I wanted anything to eat, saying she was suddenly starving for blueberry pancakes and the hottest black coffee the place had to offer. I finally let out a real laugh, and the last of my tension simply dissolved. We ordered 2 plates of Ohio-style barbecue ribs and thick mashed potatoes. When the steaming food was placed in front of us, I didn't look at my stained hands with even a hint of shame. I picked up my fork and savored the smoky sauce, feeling the warmth spread from my stomach all the way to my heart. Here, Among the night shift workers and the travelers, no one looked at me like a stain on the carpet. They just saw a woman finishing a long day with her head held high. In the soft yellow glow of the diner, Lauren began to tell me about her early years, starting a business with her husband when they had nothing but an old truck and a mountain of dreams. She told me she had been looked down upon, too, by people who thought wealth was a substitute for character. "Money is just a tool, Doris," she said. "It can build a mansion, but it can never build compassion." She told me that what I did tonight was more than just standing up for myself. She said I had saved the dignity of every hard-working person who had ever been made to feel small by people like the Thompsons. I reached into my bag and pulled out the $68 silver frame that I had taken back from their hallway. Lauren took it and ran her fingers over the polished silver. She told me not to keep it in the box anymore. She suggested I put a photo of Bill and me in our old shop inside it, because that was where a gift like this truly belonged. I looked at the frame and realized she was right. It was no longer a bribe to buy Vanessa's love. It had become a symbol of the respect I had for my own history. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I saw a message from David. He said he was sorry and that Vanessa was hysterical because her father was furious about the lost investment. He actually asked if I could call Lauren and explain things so the deal could be saved. I looked at the screen and felt a small flicker of pity, but the old sharp pain was gone. David was still the same man he was an hour ago, more worried about his father-in-law's anger than his mother's heart. I didn't type a reply. I just put the phone away. I realized that trying to fix my relationship with David right now would be like trying to patch a tire that had no tread left. It might hold air for a mile or two, but it would always be dangerous. I needed time, and David needed to learn how to stand on his own feet before I could ever think about opening that door again. Forgiving him didn't mean I had to go back and be his punching bag. The greatest act of forgiveness was allowing him to grow in his regret, while I finally grew in my freedom. When I finally pulled into my driveway and opened my old garage door, the scent of motor oil and cold steel and old wood surrounded me like a hug from Bill. I flipped on the long neon light over my workbench, and the blue-white glow reflected off my wrenches and screwdrivers, all hanging in their perfect rows. I took a rag and slowly wiped the last of the oil from my hands. Then, I polished the surface of the workbench until it shone. I placed the silver frame on the shelf, right next to Bill's old Master Mechanic Award. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would go to the store and print out the best photo I had of the two of us laughing in front of our first tow truck. My life wasn't as shiny as the world in Worthington Hills, but it was built with the strength of steel and the honesty of hard work. I stood there in my sanctuary and felt a sudden surge of power. I didn't need to be the mother-in-law of a fancy lawyer.
I just needed to be Doris, the woman who knew how to fix anything, including her own broken heart. That night, I lay in my own bed, listening to the wind rustle through the maple trees outside my window. There was no chronic headache and no tightening in my chest from wondering if I had said the wrong thing. I drifted off to sleep with a smile on my face, knowing that tomorrow I would be starting a brand new chapter. A chapter where I was no longer a side character in my son's drama, but the leading lady in a life of my own making. The scars on my soul were finally closing up, leaving behind nothing but the quiet strength of a woman who knew her own value. 6 months later, I am sitting on my porch swing, enjoying the gentle autumn chill of an Ohio morning. My small garden is now a bright sea of orange pumpkins, and the air is heavy with the scent of an apple pie cooling on the windowsill.
I hear the familiar hum of Lauren's Cadillac as she turns into my driveway. We are busy planning our next big adventure, a road trip through the national parks in the vintage Mustang that I spent the last few months helping her restore. David has started coming over every Sunday morning, just by himself, without Vanessa. He doesn't talk about million-dollar contracts or social standing anymore. Instead, he sits quietly on the porch, watching me prune my roses, and sometimes he offers to help carry the heavy pots of soil. I have forgiven him, but I no longer wait for his protection or his permission to feel safe. I have found my true family among those who see the value in my calloused, grease-stained hands. Lauren looks at me as she raises a steaming mug of tea and tells me that I look radiant. I know she is right, because finally, I have learned to love the motor oil under my fingernails, just as much as I love the freedom I fought so hard to win back. The story of Doris comes to an end, but its echo still vibrates in our hearts. We are the women who have spent our entire lives fixing the lives of everyone else, often forgetting that we are the ones who deserve to be cherished most. Doris has taught us a priceless lesson, that your value does not lie in your children's bank accounts or the empty praise of high society. It lives in the kindness you give and the self-respect you refuse to give up. Sometimes, forgiveness is not about mending a relationship that was built on lies, but about removing the heavy chains of resentment from your own heart so you can walk away in peace. Family is not just the people who share your blood. It is the people who see the beauty in the stains on your working hands. After hearing Dora's journey, how do you feel? Is there a detail that made you think of your own life? What message would you send to women who are still struggling to find their worth within their families? Please share your stories and your thoughts in the comments below, because Casey is here to listen to every word. I will see you in the next story.